Hello and welcome to this year's Public Finance Forum, virtual version. I'm Dan Carroll at the Milken Institute, and over the next 2 days, multi-sector leaders from cities and states around the country will be meeting to address two of the most critical topics facing communities. First, how we fund, finance, and deliver essential and equitable public services. And second, how we build back resilient economies with new investments in resilient infrastructure. Today is the first of two public sessions highlighting what innovative leaders are already doing to innovate during the pandemic. And later, we will hear from them over the 2 days about what they're seeking from Washington, D.C. to scale up their activities. Tomorrow at lunch, we'll be welcoming Chicago Mayor Laurie Lightfoot, economist Austin Goolsbee, Treasurer Tobias Reed of Oregon, and others who are working at the front lines of the state and local fiscal debate. Today, however, I'm pleased and honored to welcome Governor Gretchen Whitmer of the great state of Michigan. Welcome, Governor.
Thank you, Dan.
So there's so many topics I would love to discuss with you, but I'm going to keep blinders on and ask about resilient infrastructure. Obviously, fixing roads, bridges, and other types of infrastructure has been a key part of your administration. Wanted to hear how is it going and also how you're thinking about investment in infrastructure as part of a COVID recovery approach.
I appreciate the question. You know, when I ran for governor of Michigan in 2018, I ran on fixing the damn roads. That was the call to action. But in order to make Michigan a competitive place to save families money, to protect public health, we need to invest in not just our road infrastructure and bridge infrastructure, but also broadband and energy infrastructure and water infrastructure as well. So with the economic downturn that we're all seeing, due to the coronavirus pandemic, investing in infrastructure has become more urgent to our prosperity here in Michigan more than ever before. Modernizing our aging infrastructure is just absolutely essential to a strong, equitable post-COVID economic recovery. I didn't get to accomplish everything that I would have hoped during my first 2 years. Obviously, we've all had to divert a lot of our energy to COVID because of the global pandemic. But we still have made a lot of progress on infrastructure. Last year, I announced the Rebuilding Michigan bonding plan. It is a $3.5 billion plan to rebuild our state highways and bridges, to get construction workers back to work and save families money on auto repairs. And I also launched the My Clean Water Plan, which is a $500 million plan to upgrade our water infrastructure to protect families from toxic chemicals like lead and PFAS, which we are seeing contaminating our drinking water. So we've got more work to do. I want to protect the Great Lakes, which defines us here in Michigan. And I'm hopeful that with this new federal administration, we will be able to invest in infrastructure and allow us to rebuild stronger, more resilient infrastructure along the way as well.
So great stuff. Let's talk, you brought up broadband. Let's talk a little bit about broadband. Clearly the COVID-19 crisis has exposed the need for this and the critical need for better broadband connectivity and access and speed. There are 7 million rural households in America that lack it. There's also 20 million urban homes that lack it. I know that's a key concern of yours. Can you tell me how you're approaching some of that?
Absolutely. You know, I think COVID has shown us some glaring disparities, right? Whether it's in health, whether it is in jobs, whether it is in access to the internet and technology. We have seen inequity front and center in the midst of this conversation. And so really working toward increasing access to high-speed internet across our state is crucial, not just in this moment, for the long-term health and welfare of the people of the state. During the pandemic, lack of internet service meant you couldn't work from home, even if you were supposed to. It meant your kids wouldn't be able to access a quality education. You couldn't see your doctor. I mean, telemedicine has been so important throughout COVID. And so this is a moment where hopefully the world has seen broadband is not a luxury for families. It is an essential service that is key to our economic success. So to be successful, we need to address the internet divide and level the playing field for underserved communities. It means not only focusing on building out new infrastructure, but making sure that internet service is affordable for all families. During COVID, we focused on what families needed in the immediate. We provided some hotspots and devices to help families work virtually and know their kids could get the education that others were getting. But we also stayed focused on the long game. We created a task force to ensure that all of our broadband work is streamlined across our state. We invested nearly $13 million in underserved communities across Michigan to build out broadband infrastructure. And I have been fighting for new funding in the budget to further invest in this space. So this is an issue that we've seen a lot of bipartisan support. It is unfortunately rural communities as well as urban communities. And I'm hopeful that maybe this is a place in this hyper polarized world we're living in where we can find some common ground, because it's just so crucial for so many.
Yes, we hope so too. We're all leaning in on this because broadband connects so much with a lot of the other challenges around electrification and other issues. On that question, Michigan means making things. Michigan's economy is known for manufacturing, robotics, and of course the automotive industry. Was wondering what you are doing to ensure that Michigan stays globally competitive in autos and batteries and the investment and the transition to electric vehicles and this whole shifting towards advanced mobility.
Yeah, so we all know Michigan put the world on wheels, but the industry around automobiles and transportation and future mobility is changing, and Michigan is changing too. I've been working very closely with our automakers to ensure that we keep good paying jobs here in Michigan and ensure that our state remains the go-to place to build, test, and deploy the mobility solutions of the future. That means focusing on electrified future of mobility and building cleaner infrastructure. And we've made a lot of investments and announced a lot of investments over the last 2 years. This past year, I also created the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, where we're working hard on a mobility strategy that is focused on making sure that Michigan has the talent to do these jobs of the future and the infrastructure investment to support these mobility solutions. And so it's strategic planning and investment and including different, I think, components of the landscape to make sure that we're being mindful and smart. In 2019, I launched the My Power Grid, an initiative that was designed to guide our state through energy industry transition to clean energy. We're focused on how Michigan, in partnership with our utilities, can modernize our electric grid and encourage the use of electric vehicles with the support they need across the state. And we've also made some direct investments. And just the last 2 years, we've invested over $20 million to build charging stations in communities across Michigan and put money into training Michiganders for these jobs of the future. So we've got incredible leaders in our senators and many of our members of Congress. I'm optimistic that Congress is going to pass legislation that Senator Stabenow and Congressman Kildee have been working on to expand the electric vehicle tax credit. And Senator Peters is working to help states safely test and deploy automated vehicles. Congresswoman Dingell and Stevens, they are true champions of our auto industry and are working with the Senate to promote research and development of clean vehicle and advanced safety technologies. And so I am grateful that we will have a wonderful partner in the White House that's focused on rebuilding our economy. He's focused on climate change. I've spent a lot of time talking with President Biden before he was President Biden, and I know how passionate he is about this subject as well, and how bullish he is about making sure that we continue to lead in manufacturing and solving climate change issues. And so I'm really optimistic about where we are headed as a nation and certainly where we're headed as a state.
Certainly a dream team with senators and members of Congress. I imagine also on some of the energy and electrification stuff, you've got Jennifer Granholm potentially on speed dial soon, right?
That's right. We got Jennifer Granholm in energy, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House. And I'm excited too, Pete Buttigieg in transportation and my good friend Gina Raimondo in commerce. I think this really is an incredibly talented, forward-looking group of people, and I think we're going to do some great things together.
So let's turn our eyes a little bit more into Washington, D.C. What advice would you offer federal policymakers in Washington, D.C. as they think about a new infrastructure package The Milken Institute, along with a number of other partners, has been pushing this idea of pre-development capital and regional solutions, because different areas have different strengths and are looking at these strategies in different ways, whether electrification or dealing with floods or other resilient infrastructure challenges. What's your, other than move money out and core support and give us flexibility, what are you suggesting to the team?
Well, all of those things, of course, but also I think it's time to go big. I mean, our infrastructure crisis is real, and it has been a long time saga in the making. Some of my colleagues, I think, kind of, were wondering about this slogan, "Fix the damn roads," and many of them have adopted it because it feeds into the sense that people have that we have underinvested in infrastructure for a long time, and it comes with a huge cost. So, although Congress is closely divided, I really think that we have an opportunity here, and that we should act like it. Let's put a comprehensive plan on the table for real investment in infrastructure. Let's boost the economy and address climate change and put people to work. We can do all of these things. And remember that while it's been hard to agree how we pay for it, I think Americans across the country know we need to make this infrastructure investment, and we need to make the jobs of the future, growing them right here in the U.S. So I really think it's a bipartisan message. There are more places policymakers can find agreement in this space. And so I think that there's a lot of potential Republican support for the idea that it's time to go all in on electric vehicles and charging infrastructure. And if we think big, I think we're going to be able to increase our global competitiveness, create jobs, and reduce emissions, which is the trifecta. Of course, policymakers should remember that robust infrastructure package is critical in helping our economy recover from the pandemic. And so it's time to start talking about infrastructure week and really come together on an infrastructure focus that is sustained and not just a moment, but is a movement. And I think we've got the right people to move this along, but they need to be supported, and they need to hear not just from people like me, but your institute and all of the leaders that are affiliated with it.
Amen to all that, Governor. As I hear you talk, I'm even imagining that on regional solutions, auto supply chains, et cetera, that maybe even in the off season, you'd be willing to work with folks from Ohio and Indiana.
You know what? I'll tell you something funny, Dan. Throughout COVID, I have come to really appreciate my colleagues, especially our neighboring colleagues. Mike DeWine, Eric Holcomb, the Ohio and Indiana, but also JB Pritzker from Illinois, and Evers and Walls from Wisconsin and Minnesota, respectively. I couldn't have navigated this without them. I think we have built relationships, and we're focused on getting our economies back up. And maybe there are some great opportunities with people that we maybe still root against during football season, but can partner with to really move the needle in this space.
I think you're right, Governor. And I think you're right about the infrastructure. The time is here. The economic case in terms of job creation and business competitiveness is too strong. What about the workforce question? Because there are great training centers with unions and other groups across the country, but it's also a lot of new skills are going to be needed. Is that something that you've been looking at a little bit from your perspective in Michigan?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was just on the phone with the utility workers the other day, and they're making a big investment in a training facility. And they've done that with Consumers Energy, one of our big utilities here, to train people for these future of energy jobs. And it's exciting. I think there's a great opportunity to strengthen our infrastructure workforce as we grow our economy in this space, even in the face of a pandemic. President Biden has pledged to create millions of good paying jobs in this sector. Here in Michigan, we're doing our part to build our economy back better by boosting skills training and supporting small business and putting shovels in the ground, moving dirt, as I like to say, to fix the roads. Last week, I announced our Michigan recovery plan, our COVID recovery plan, which will jumpstart our state's economy and help end the pandemic. It includes initiatives to rebuild small business, attract new jobs, and upskill our workforce. I think there's a wealth of opportunities to promote these initiatives in the infrastructure workforce in particular. So the plan is really about funding our statewide pre-apprenticeship program with the goal of developing qualified candidates for apprenticeships and energy jobs, which will continue building on the program's past successes in developing candidates for jobs in construction industry. And my 60 by 30 initiative that I announced in my State of the State 2 years ago, it's designed to close the skills gap and increase opportunity for people in my state, providing greater access to education and skills that create opportunities for better jobs and bigger paychecks. And then the Rebuilding Michigan plan that I told you about a little bit earlier will continue to create jobs and fix roads. And so these three initiatives support construction jobs, clean energy jobs, mobility jobs, and more. And I think there's going to be continued opportunity in this space. And we've got to keep giving Michiganders the skills chances so that they can get into those jobs, which are the future. They pay well, and we can really make a difference in climate change. So it's all good stuff.
Speaking of climate change, I want to squeeze in one last question. I know that in Biden's initial emergency plan, he called for $3 billion for the Economic Development Administration to work on bottom-up economic development and resilient infrastructure. They've seen, as we'll hear in the next panel, a lot of interest in flood control and managing floods. You guys had a really tough flood last year in Midland. How is that? How are those communities doing after that?
Yeah, so we're recovering. It's there are still some issues that we need to work through, and I'm grateful that we'll have an administration. I think that will help us kind of close the chapter on some of those ongoing needs. But to have a 500-year flooding event happen in the middle of a 100-year pandemic, that was maybe one of the moments in the last 12 months where I thought, oh, I mean, how on earth are we going to navigate this too? But certainly climate change is having an impact. We've had record rainfalls. Our Great Lakes have not frozen as solidly as they usually do. We've got erosion along the shores, and so climate change is really impacting us in so many profound ways. And we've got to address the immediate concerns, but also take action so that we mitigate the damage. And we got our work cut out for us, but there's no question people are feeling it and people are motivated now. And we have a leadership in Washington, D.C. I think that will really live up to that promise.
And great leadership in Michigan and with governors across the country. I hate to end it there, but I know you probably have a 1,000-year event that you need to start planning for, and how busy you are. We'd love to have you back next year at the Public Finance Forum, hopefully when you can update on his progress. We'll be in a hotel ballroom where the applause will be more audible than Zoom applause. But again, thank you for your service and for sharing your time and insights with us. Now let me hand the reins over to Laurie Schoeman, National Director of Resilience at Enterprise Community, who will moderate our panel of top-flight resilience innovators from regions across the U.S. Laurie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you, Governor Whitmer, for your incredible leadership and your vision and all of the incredible work that you're doing across the nation to scale these important concepts. So thank you so much. I am so honored to be with my esteemed panelists today to discuss a critical conversation around how do we ensure that our infrastructure is going to be able to withstand the multiple risks that we're facing as a nation. And this is a great follow-up, Dan, to the discussion you just had with Governor Whitmer, which I think you laid a great foundation for the conversation we're about to have. So I want to open up with a couple of remarks. We know, based on our experience, what we just heard, that existing shocks and stresses in our nation have been deeply exacerbated by the cascading effects of climate change and the global storm of the COVID-19 pandemic. This collision has revealed to us that we need a holistic review and resetting of our policies, institutions, and systems that reduce the fragility of our nation, particularly for those that are already so vulnerable. Much of our infrastructure today, which includes transportation, which you'll hear about, communications, utilities. We just heard about EV. We just heard about tech and broadband, as well as housing, which millions of our companies and workforce depend on and is the linchpin of our economy, is in a state of repair and is ill prepared to withstand the physical realities of the multiple risks and realities of climate change. And as we just heard, it's not just tornadoes, it's not just earthquakes, it's flooding, it's extreme heat. And all of this is putting a great burden on our already vulnerable infrastructure systems. This will require deep financial and social and capital commitment to ensuring that our infrastructure is brought to a state of repair. As Congress considers a wide range of ideas to get much needed investment into our infrastructure to promote job creation and promote recovery, we need to figure out ways of catalyzing local buy-in and local economic resilience because these fiscal shortfalls are very likely to continue, as many of you know, and I'm looking forward to discovering with you all today some of your best practices and advice for our administration. We know that the US, under the leadership of the Biden administration, will draw upon its rich reserve of ingenuity, national grit, and know-how to build our nation's capacity to bounce forward from climate-related shocks into a more sustainable way of life. We have an important opportunity today, and I want to thank the Milken Institute under Dan's leadership for platforming this conversation. For the purpose of our conversation in the next hour, I will state, and we can debate this, but that the definition of resilient infrastructure is infrastructure that affords us the ability to respond, absorb shock, and adapt to, as well as recover in a disruptive event. And now is the time to start thinking, how are we going to do this? These efforts have to be informed by all of you at the local level, demonstrating your leadership. So with further ado, I'd like to first introduce Jainey Bavishi, who's the director of New York City's Mayor's Office of Resiliency. Then we're going to hear from Judge Gary Moore, who is the president of the National Association of Counties, or NACo, as well as a judge for Boone County, Kentucky. We're also going to hear from Eric Letsinger, who's the CEO of Quantified Ventures and the chairman of ReHarvest Partners. And then finally, our colleague Angela Martinez, who's the regional director for the U.S. Economic Development Administration for the Midwest. So with further ado, again, I'm your moderator, Laurie Schoeman, National Director for Enterprises Resiliency Disaster Recovery work around the nation. I'd like to now ask you all, can you tell us some of the best practices and lessons learned you can share about teeing up resilient infrastructure in your particular jurisdiction or community? Jainey, can you tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing in New York City?
Sure, thanks, Laurie, and thanks, Dan, and then the Milken Institute for having this very timely conversation. So, in my role in the New York City Mayor's Office, one of the things that I am responsible for overseeing is really the development of this new class of infrastructure that we're building since Sandy, and that's coastal protection infrastructure. New York City is investing over $20 billion into resiliency programs and infrastructure citywide. And we have 520 miles of coastline. That, by the way, is more than Miami, Boston, Los Angeles, and San Francisco combined. So as you might imagine, we're very concerned about the impacts of sea level rise as well as future Sandy-like coastal storms on our coastal communities. We are investing some of this post-Sandy federal grant money into building this new class of infrastructure and protecting our coastal communities from these future climate threats. These solutions are very different across the entire city. Our coastal communities look different based on their geography and topography, the way waterfront land is used, the amount of public land that's available to actually build these solutions. So each one of these solutions is quite unique and really needs to be developed based on the specific site conditions that we find in each of these coastal communities. Community engagement is also incredibly critical to developing these solutions and getting buy-in. These investments are really opportunities to transform our waterfront communities and not only just keep them safe, but also improve quality of life, really think about what other amenities we can achieve or co-benefits we can achieve through these investments. A great example of this is the Eastside Coastal Resiliency Project. This is a 2.5 mile long project that will protect 110,000 people on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It's a community that was really devastated by Hurricane Sandy. And I should mention 28,000 of those people live in public housing. So this is very much a project with equity at its center. We sought to build a coastal protection project in this neighborhood, and we're going to be raising East River Park, which is a park that that overlaps with much of the footprint of the project, and building a flood wall at the water's edge. But we're also rebuilding pedestrian bridges that go into the park and rebuilding the park itself to create new amenities for the community. These are things that the community said they wanted, and that's how they became part of the project. I'll mention two other things. One is that I think because we're building a new class of infrastructure, it's raising a lot of questions about who will operate and maintain this infrastructure. We don't have an existing city agency that inspects and regularly operates and deploys coastal protection features. So those are questions that we are now having to grapple with as this infrastructure comes online. My final point that I'll make here is that this is not just about coastal infrastructure. We need to account for future climate impacts in every school that we build, in every road that we build, in every wastewater treatment plant that we build. So we've actually created a set of climate resiliency design guidelines that take our local climate projections for tidal flooding, for coastal storms, for extreme heat, for intense precipitation, and provide guidance to designers and engineers on how to incorporate those projections into the design and construction of every capital project in our $90 billion capital portfolio. They have been voluntary so far, but there's actually been local legislation introduced by City Council to pilot the guidelines first and then eventually move into a mandate. And that will represent a really big step in making sure that we're mainstreaming the consideration of climate change in every city investment that we make.
Thank you, Jainey. And before we turn to Judge Moore, I do want to point out something you said, which is critical for us to consider and ensure we prioritize, which is funding for operations and maintenance. If we do not have funding set aside for operations and maintenance in the beginning of a capital project, it will fail. And this is one of the big shortfalls of our financing structure for infrastructure. So I'm glad you mentioned that, and we'll talk about that later. Judge Moore.
Well, thank you so much. And first, Gary Moore, I'm the elected county executive here in Boone County, Kentucky. When you hear me talk about the Cincinnati International Airport, understand that I'm 12 miles from Cincinnati. So Boone County, Kentucky is part of the Cincinnati metro region, and we're part of the OKI Council of Governments. So our regional planning, our metropolitan planning organization is a 3-state, 8-county regional planning organization. But here in Boone County at the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport, Amazon is building their Prime Air Hub, a $1.5 billion investment that's going to create at least 3,000 jobs and will be tiered. When the final phases are done, it'll be one of the largest buildings in the US and one of the largest buildings in the world. So we are working feverishly to try to get roads, mass transit, and the supporting infrastructure built, because this facility is going to be opening later this year, late summer, early fall of this year. So we've already opened a new interstate interchange just west of the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport. But a lot of work's going into this. And it takes working at all levels, of course, to make this happen. We cannot accomplish these things without a strong federal partner and a strong state partner, but also the private sector. We have 2 infra grants happening in our county at this time, covering 2 interstate interchanges. And that also involves a private participation. The local match is also being provided by the local employers and the businesses in that area, along with the county. So partnerships, teamwork, regional efforts, all or what we're about here right now. And then, of course, in the midst of all of this, a pandemic. So we know in county governments that we are on the front lines. We are operating health departments and working with our local healthcare facilities. And that just is another added feature to my daily calendar. The thing that I will say is that the partnerships, again, extremely critical. And working with other cities and counties in our unit of governments is also a key component to this. So with my NACo hat on for a moment as president of the National Association of Counties, I will tell you that broadband, as Governor Whitmer said a moment ago, broadband has really just escalated to the top. Before we were talking water, sewer, and roads, but now broadband is in that conversation. And as was stated earlier, people are working at home. We're seeing non-traditional instruction, our NTI programs within our K-12 school system and higher ed. All of those things are critical. In my county alone, we determined that there were 11,000 households that have no service and no plans for service in the next 3 to 5 years. Another 8,000 homes that are underserved with insufficient speeds and coverage. So because of my knowledge of what's happening in my county as NACo president and talking with my other county officials, I created a broadband task force at NACo to look at this issue and determine how can we, once again, not accomplish all this on our own because we don't have the resources, but we need the strong partnerships, private and public sectors, and all levels of government. So those are things we're working on. And as always, we like to remind people that 45% of our nation's public roads and nearly 40% of our bridges across this country are owned or operated by county governments. And you can apply those same kind of percentage to transit systems. It's about 70% of the transit systems are funded and operated by local government. So we are working feverishly to try to deal with these things. We know that the economic recovery is going to come, and we can hopefully speed that up and deal with recovery quicker and more efficiently by working together and by working as partners. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm sure we're going to talk more about that in a moment.
Thank you so much, Judge Moore. Your point about regional coordination, I think, goes hand in hand with the effort to increase broadband access because it really needs to be a regional effort. It can't just be siloed, and that's critical as we look to the future. Thank you so much. Eric Letsinger, what are your thoughts on this question?
Thanks, Laurie. Thanks. Pleasure to be here. I'm Eric Letsinger. I'm the CEO of Quantified Ventures and the chairman of the board of ReHarvest Partners. We are an outcomes-based capital firm working to under two premises. Basically, number one, how can we drive more resilience projects that are financed in such a way that enable the government to pay for the outcomes on the back end, as opposed to paying for everything on the front end and hoping for the best. We operate in two key areas. Number one, urban green infrastructure. So we pioneered the environmental impact bond, which is an outcomes-based financing vehicle, which essentially for those cities wanting to move forward with significant amounts of green infrastructure to address their stormwater, flooding, resilience challenges, instead of paving more things or in addition to paving more things, the green infrastructure might bring a different risk profile that the public sector is not comfortable with. So they find themselves in the classic situation of, should I go do the business as usual, the gray infrastructure, or should I do green infrastructure? What outcomes-based financing is all about is tipping the scale, de-risking the green infrastructure project just enough to make it a rational choice for the government to choose the innovative green infrastructure project over the gray infrastructure project. We've had great success with doing this in Washington, D.C. and New Orleans and Buffalo and Atlanta and Hampton, Virginia, to get more urban and coastal resilience projects off of priority number 27 in your capital improvement plan, but up to number 1 and then out on the field by drawing in the capital that wants to take the performance bet of that green infrastructure. We're also using similar models in the realm of actually trying to enable water treatment facilities around the country to reduce their capital expenses and their operating expenses by financing the development of upstream nature-based infrastructure on farms to reduce the phosphorus and nitrate runoff from getting off of those farms and getting into the waterways and coming down to the municipalities who are regulated by the EPA to clean that water. It's expensive. And rather than spending a gajillion dollars of upgrading your water treatment facility, it's more inexpensive to pay the farmers to profitably build the conservation practices that will reduce that water quality drain that municipalities are having to pick up that bill. So we used our outcomes-based financing models. We have a very scalable model that we've developed in Iowa and have expanded to Ohio and Illinois, where we're paying farmers to profitably build those conservation practices on their farms. By the way, yes, I said profitably build those, right? So this isn't a subsidy, it's not a cost share. This is revenue in farmers' pockets to build the conservation practice. And then at the end of that growing season, we sell the carbon offsets to corporations like Cargill, and we sell the water quality benefit to 3 levels of government, whether it's the municipalities like Cedar Rapids, or whether it's the State Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship for the state of Iowa, or whether it's the USDA. We have offtake agreements for them to buy those water quality benefits that make that whole thing pencil and scale. And we're really excited about these innovative financing models that allow for the public sector to explore some of the more nature-based infrastructure projects that they have an appetite and an interest to move forward with, and their citizens certainly want them. But we've lacked financing models and financing vehicles to attract scadzooks of capital, that's a technical term, to actually put more of those projects on the field. Laurie, I'll turn it back to you. There's an overview of what we do.
Thank you, Eric. And I am glad that you touched upon the issues of front-end investment in design and in conservation, which gets back to the point we made earlier about how do we ensure that operations and maintenance is paid for, right? Less operations and maintenance yields greater success in the projects. And then how can we leverage and work with multiple sectors to achieve our goals, particularly around financing. And we need outcomes-based performance measures as well. Thank you, Eric. Angela, you sit in a position where you've got much more of a sort of 10,000 foot view on what is happening across the Midwest. You have no shortage of challenges: windstorms, tornadoes, drought, flooding, and you're dealing with incredible workforce needs. Can you tell us a little bit about what EDA is looking at investing in resilience and infrastructure, and some of the best practices you've seen in your work as a funder?
Sure. Well, thank you, Laurie, and thanks to the Milken Institute for hosting this conversation today. It was great to hear from the governor, and I noted this week that it's Michigan's birthday this week, so happy birthday to Michigan. Since I've been here in the Denver regional office about 5 years, we've certainly had our fair share of discussions about resilient infrastructure. When I first came on board here, we were dealing with historic flooding in Missouri, and we worked with FEMA and other agencies to help the state develop a recovery plan. Since then, as you noted, our states have faced extreme flooding, a derecho, tornadoes, wildfires, and droughts. And, you know, these events don't often make the national nightly news like a major hurricane might, but we know that they often last for a very long time, and they have devastating impacts on people's lives, their mobility, and certainly the regional economy. Just to note, the 10 states that I represent in EDA's Denver region are Colorado, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. And we know, as we heard from the governor, that the coronavirus pandemic is really straining state and local government resources even more at a time when they definitely need resilient infrastructure investment. And I really feel for the governor, having had the major flooding in the state. I know I'm certainly holding my breath every day, hoping that another disaster doesn't hit one of our states as they're also trying to recover from the pandemic. I saw a headline a couple of months ago that said, "Why bounce back from COVID-19 when we can bounce forward?" And that struck me because that's really what our organization, my agency, does at EDA, is we help communities bounce forward. Congress has recognized this role, and Dan mentioned that earlier, that the Biden administration is looking to put $3 billion into EDA to help recover. And over the past years, Congress has provided EDA with over $1 billion for disaster recovery support. The CARES Act provided us with $1.5 billion to help communities recover from the pandemic. And, you know, to me, that's a lot of money. But unfortunately, with the needs that we have, it's really just a drop in the bucket. So I want to share a couple examples of some projects that we've done, and some high-level points that I think we might want to think about. First is planning. Our agency funds a network of regional economic development organizations that are responsible for gathering public and private interest within a region together and developing and implementing a 5-year plan for their region. It makes sense for them to do that because in a disaster situation, they're often the ones that are focusing on resilience through building capacity at the local level. They're sort of a hub for coordination. They get information out, and they're usually the ones that are helping put together grant applications to seek funding. But one of the things that we see is that there is a plan for our agency, there's a plan for HUD money, there's a plan for FEMA money, and these local communities and regional stakeholders have to build all these plans to be eligible for those funding opportunities. We have seen regions that work together to build maybe their EDA plan and their hazard mitigation plan or other federal plans. And one example is in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. They, as you guys may recall, had really horrible flooding in 2008. And the regional leaders there came together to really focus on overall resiliency planning. One of the counties was selected for a National Academy of Sciences Resilient America pilot grant. And I think that nudge from the federal government really helped bring them together to create a coordinated effort around their EDA plan, transportation, hazard mitigation, and their HUD plan. So we do see that that is happening, but I certainly think that we could incentivize that kind of collaboration and coordination a little bit more. One thing I did want to note for the folks listening today is because of the pandemic, a lot of communities that might not have been eligible for federal funding are now because of the national declared emergency. So I'd encourage you to take a look at those funding opportunities for planning or other types of projects, and you may be eligible for that. The second thing I wanted to note is, this is certainly not breaking news to anyone, but we see a lot of funding needs for deferred maintenance projects. And we also see a lack of resources for the necessary work that comes before a shovel can even go into the ground. Sometimes a project will come into us and it's delayed for months while the applicant focuses on the engineering or the design work or the environmental surveys or feasibility studies. And I know that, you know, often we may not even see a project because the community doesn't have the necessary funding to fund those activities. And also at EDA, funding for deferred maintenance projects have a harder time being competitive for EDA dollars. Another example is in Yankton, South Dakota. Their aging wastewater treatment plant failed during a severe spring storm, caused millions of dollars of damage and threatened local businesses. And luckily, through disaster supplemental funding, EDA was able to come in and help the city upgrade its infrastructure and really think more long term. And that was a big discussion that we had with them is, you know, let's not make it last until the next storm, but really make it more resilient and allow the city to grow and be resilient as well. You know, we also know that the pandemic is making, you know, a bad situation worse for local finances, and we really need multiple sources of funding to make these bigger projects happen. In Hamburg, Iowa, for example, the town sits in between two rivers, and they knew that their levee wasn't going to protect them if a major storm came through. And they were trying to raise money to raise the levee, and they didn't make it in time, and the city was devastated. The Army Corps of Engineers was able to rebuild the levee to the previous height, which obviously wasn't enough. So again, with our disaster funding, we were able to come in and elevate the levee with an $8 million grant to raise it to a level that will protect it. And I think that shows how, you know, federal agencies can coordinate as well to help communities in need. I will note that $8 million is on the higher end of what EDA can contribute. Our average infrastructure grants range from about $1 million to $3 million. So that makes us just a very small piece of a much broader project. So we really need to ensure that we have good collaboration between federal funding agencies, state and local government, and of course the private sector and philanthropy as well. And then finally, we focus on the need for resilient infrastructure, Laurie, and I think you said this earlier, because we need resilient economies. And the governor said this too, we need to protect and grow jobs. And our research at EDA shows that for every $1 invested in an infrastructure project, it'll generate $15 in private investment. And these are the companies that are hiring workers and innovating right here in our own regions and communities. You know, and we've talked about this several times already this afternoon, but we're going to see more and more of these frequent and intense storms and wildfires. You know, every year we're breaking the record of the previous year. So I really think that's why this discussion is so important.
Thank you.
And
thank you, Angela.
It was great to hear from everyone. So
thank you, Angela. And for everyone in the audience that may not know this, you know, the EDA does have funding for infrastructure. There are additional funding sources. FEMA has just launched a building resilient brick program, which is building resilient inclusive communities. This is a source of funding. It's growing. There's funding through the USDA for utilities and infrastructure for rural communities. So there is a lot of funding out there. I'd like to find out from our colleagues, what are some of the strategies and what are some of the things that you need the federal government to do to support your work? I will say from my perspective in the housing space, one of the issues we've seen throughout the country for many communities, and Jainey, this may be very relevant for you as well, and certainly for you, Judge Moore, is often the federal funding is reimbursement based. So you have to have a cash in hand working capital fund in order to deploy this the strategies and fix the infrastructure, and then you'll get reimbursed. It's very difficult for some, especially smaller municipalities, to come up with that working capital, and so that limits their ability to bring in federal dollars. So, Judge Moore, I'd like to start with you. What are some of the things you need the federal government to step up and do to support your efforts at a regional and local level?
One of the things that we are advocating for through NACo is a pre-development fund. And I think that might have been mentioned earlier, but you know, when we think about the need for planning, for engineering, and to get projects shovel ready, a pre-development fund would be something that would be extremely helpful, especially for small to mid-sized counties that don't have large budgets. So having that done would also save time as well as funding. And we are advocating, of course, through our new federal partners, the new administration, for more infrastructure funding at all levels. In a stimulus type bill, of course, one-time funding, we are advocating that counties receive direct and funding as soon as possible to all governments. In the last CARES Act, only communities 500,000 and larger received direct allocation, and that left a lot of folks out. Some governors did sub-allocate state funds, and some governors did not. So one-time funding is important to stimulate our economy and the restart, but we also need that steady funding. The Highway Trust Fund needs to be funded in a more aggressive way so that we can do multi-year planning and we have a reliable source of funding at the state and local level. So I know that those are broad and not cheap. I know there's a lot of cost there, but those are a few things that come to mind.
Thank you. Pre-development and pre-development is critical not only to set up a project, go through the NEPA, go through all of the other pre-development exercises, but also to get the engineering firms, the architecture firms on hand. Critical, even to just propose a grant.
Yes, you mentioned NEPA, regulations and doing things simultaneously. We've seen some progress with that through the last several years. We hope that continues and that projects aren't slowed down by the regulatory process. We want to check all the boxes and do everything we need to protect our environment, but do that in a timely way.
Absolutely. Eric, what are your thoughts? What do you need support for?
Sure. Sarah, I would put my comments under two different buckets or two premises I would love for the federal government to be thinking about. Number one, we're asking a lot of our municipalities and counties and states in this resilience challenge, right? Meaning that's a steep mountain we're asking them to climb. And if we're going to expect them to get up that mountain, innovation's got to be a big part of that, right? We're not going to business as usual our way up that mountain. If we're going to expect innovation from these players at the municipal, county, and state level, we're going to have to give them new ways of paying for things, because the standard ways of paying for these types of projects do not encourage, matter of fact, they discourage the innovation that we want. So that's premise number one. Premise number two, nature reduces risk. Let's breathe for a moment and absorb that. Nature reduces, and there's a lot of, and Jainey, I see you smiling, looking over these projects in New York City, green infrastructure solutions, upstream conservation practices that reduce some of the things I was talking about before. These things work. Nature's pretty good at doing what it's supposed to do. Let's get more of that back on the field to reduce the risk. The good news is there's financing models that pay for this stuff and de-risk it for the public sector. But to Gary's point, if a flood of infrastructure funding gets poured in with an over prioritization of shovel ready without the pre-development funds to do something different, i.e. not business as usual, we'll end up with business as usual. So I want to second the emotion that Gary put on the table for pre-development funds and encourage an openness to these concepts of enabling the government, which it's already doing. We've proven this is possible, to enable the government to pay for the outcomes instead of outlaying all the cash at the front end and hoping for the best.
Thank you, Eric, and I'm pleased to share that Army Corps, FEMA, green infrastructure adaptation practices is being more and more embraced by the traditional grayscape and gray infrastructure community. And we've seen where nature works, especially around flooding, especially around certain climate hazards. And there's a reason for that, because those natural systems are adaptive, right? So how can we balance this issue of going back to daylighting some streets that don't need to be paved and ensuring that there's fortifications around flooding to reduce flooding? And there's a real, this is a great moment for our nation in terms of thinking about that. Jainey, what are your thoughts? How can the federal government and the new administration help you scale your work in New York City and through the region?
Well, first, let me just say that I agree with what Eric and Gary said. With one amendment, Gary said that small counties and cities need pre-development dollars. I will say that big cities need pre-development dollars too. There was a New York Times article the other day by Chris Flavelle on essentially the potential of $10 billion of FEMA funding becoming available if the maximum allowable amounts based on COVID response spending went to hazard mitigation program and the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities programs that FEMA has. In our experience in New York City, in the last round of BRIC funding, we only had a small number of eligible projects to even propose because they emphasize shovel-ready projects. So I just want to really hone in on that. I also think the federal government can help set standards. We saw the Biden administration put the federal flood risk management standard back in place. I worked in the Obama administration. It's something I worked on. I think that's a really important step towards incentivizing investments in resilience. So I think we need more of that. I will also say that resilience is not just about infrastructure. It is also about investing in programming that can be paired with infrastructure. So in our work in extreme heat in New York City, we are making the infrastructure investments where we're increasing vegetation in heat vulnerable communities. We're increasing reflective surfaces through a program that coats rooftops white and also, by the way, creates jobs in the process. But we're pairing those investments with investments in social cohesion, investments in ensuring that home health aides can detect early signs of heat illness and training those home health aides to do that. Those kinds of investments are important. It creates the multiple lines of defense. That's what resilience is all about. The last thing I'll say is that I think we need to look at the benefit cost analyses of the programs that are meant to invest in resilience. Too often they overemphasize property value in a way that does not enable cities to invest those dollars in the communities that are most socially vulnerable as well as the most physically vulnerable. Looking at those benefit cost analyses and ensuring that they take a number of risk factors into account will allow us to make those investments more equitably.
Thank you, Jainey. We only have a couple minutes left, and we could go on we could talk about this. We could actually have a conference about this, for goodness sake. I'd like to conclude us by asking each of you to think about what is your moonshot for the next 4 years around infrastructure and resiliency. I'll start. My moonshot for the housing infrastructure sector is that all utility infrastructure will be fortified to be commensurate with the needs of housing around the nation, and the stability of grid will be achieved. Moonshot. Eric.
Hypoxia in the Gulf, wipe it out. How to do it? Scale these green nature-based infrastructure projects, all the cities, all the states along the Mississippi River.
Thank you, Eric. Judge Moore, moonshot.
I didn't get to talk about the Brent Spence Bridge, which is a mega project, an interstate bridge from Kentucky to Ohio, but it connects Detroit to Miami. So I would love to see these major projects of national significance be dealt with outside the normal funding formula so that we can concentrate on communities while those major projects are dealt with and the problems are solved.
Angela, what's your moonshot?
Thanks. Well, I guess my moonshot would be, if EDA and the federal government gets the types of dollars that we're talking about today and that have been projected, that we can be really smart and innovative about how we get those dollars into communities and really help improve local and regional communities and people's quality of life.
Jainey, could you conclude us with your moonshot?
Let's account for climate change and climate impacts in every dollar the federal government spends. That's the only way we're going to be able to meet the moment and actually rise to the challenge that climate change presents.
Beautiful.
And can I add, find true bipartisanship so that we can solve these problems?
Beautiful, beautiful concluding words, Judge Moore, from your mouth to the nation's ears. Thank you all so much for participating today. This was a fantastic conversation, a great start to the new year. Dan and the Milken Institute team, thank you so much for having us today. We look forward to continuing this conversation with you all. And please, let's continue to work together and find solutions to build a resilient future.